Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. My name is Calvin Chan. I'm a senior planner with the Community Development Department for the City of Menlo Park. It's really exciting to be here today. This is our very first hybrid meeting in support of the housing element update. So we're really glad to be here with you in person at the council chambers and also online via Zoom. You'll see broadcasted behind me the screen, and that's for the people joining via Zoom so that they can see us here. I'll now just introduce some other members of our project team that are in support of the housing element update, and then we'll turn it over to my colleague, Tom Smith, who will introduce the project team joining us virtually. And I'll go to my right.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Jeff Bradley with Metropolitan Planning Group. We're a planning firm headquartered down in Campbell, working on planning throughout the Bay Area, including housing elements, safety elements, and environmental justice elements, planning for the future of our communities. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I can also provide my contact information for follow-on information. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, community. Thank you all for being here. My name is Violet Saena, and I'm the Executive Director of Climate Resilient Communities, a new partner to this project. We are very fortunate and grateful to be here tonight, be part of this planning team. Looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Turner. I'm an assistant planner with the city, helping the team out with the housing element update and environmental justice and safety element update as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cristobal Soy Mendoza. I use pronouns she, her, and hers. And I am also an assistant planner, but for M Group, who is assisting the city with their housing element, environmental justice element, and safety element.
Great, thank you, everyone. And just before we get started with our presentations, Cristobal and I just want to go over some of the instructions for Zoom for the people joining us virtually in case they want to log into that interpretation feature. We do have live Spanish interpreters doing concurrent translation. So for step one, to activate the interpretation, please find the world symbol at the bottom right-hand corner of your control bar, and you can click on the interpretation button. Step two is to choose your preferred language. So that's either English or Spanish. And then for people joining us by phone or tablet, if you have entered on the phone or tablet, please look for the three dots that say more, and then look for the language interpretation and then click English. If you're doing this by phone, remember to press the done button to activate this interpretation.
Great. Y para los que hablan en español, para activar la interpretación en español, debe buscar el símbolo del mundo al lado derecho o en la pantalla a la izquierda o la derecha y empuje el control que dice interpretación y dale clic. Luego escoge el idioma español. Y si ha entrado desde teléfono o tableta, busca el símbolo de 3 puntos o más y luego oprima la interpretación de idiomas y escoge español. Y luego presione Done, Listo o Terminar.
Thanks, everyone. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Tom Smith, who will introduce the team joining us virtually.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, whether you're live in the City Council chambers or here on Zoom, where we have about 40 attendees at the moment. So we really appreciate your attendance this evening. I'm Tom Smith. I'm an acting principal planner with the City of Menlo Park. And also joining us virtually this evening, we have Eric Calloway from Change Lab Solutions and Sung Kwan from M Group and Aaron Tao from M Group. And then we also have our interpreters, Ana Cruz and Noemi Gonzalez, joining us as well. So thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you, Cal.
Can we see the next slides? So again, welcome. We have all introduced ourselves and the project team. Just to touch a little bit more on that, again, we are working together with the City of Menlo Park, Group, Change Lab Solutions, and I'm here representing Climate Resilient Communities. Next slide, please. So our invitation and having you here tonight, the hope is for our planning team and the City of Menlo Park to engage our community in this next, engage our community further to allow us to be able to capture and also provide the opportunity to share with our community the the components that we're here to discuss, including not only the housing element, as well as the environmental justice element, which is a new element for the City of Menlo Park, as well as the safety. Tonight, our purpose and our goal is to give you a little bit of background, hopefully the background information, definitions, and also the planning process will allow us or even create the opportunity to hopefully increase your understanding and engagement in future engagement processes to help us gather input for environmental justice as well as our safety element. So we're going to talk about the environmental justice planning process. The city and also our team tonight will present some existing analysis that have been completed. And then with the safety element, we're going to cover how and why we are updating the safety elements. And this is mainly due to the local hazard mitigation plans by the county that recently completed. And then again, as you can see here, and I'm sure also on Zoom, you will see boards or murals that will allow you to participate and engage and hopefully get some of that expertise from yourselves to help us put this plan together. Next slide, please. So the main outcomes, we are here, again, provide baseline understanding what environmental justice is and also safety topics. At the same time, we hope that we will get some input, some initial reactions from you here tonight on these issues, and then also gather any priorities or perspectives that can help us prioritize for this important plan. Next slide, please. So the housing element update project, yes, that's what we call it. So two updated elements. One is the housing element. Second is the safety element. And then again, the environmental justice element is the new element. So this has never been done before. It was never been part of the City of Menlo Park general plan. So that's why, we're very excited. I'm so glad that many of you are here today, that you're going to be participating in putting this element together. The overall goals from all these three elements, the hope is that whatever plans and policies that we come out of during this consultation process, the plans and the policies that we'll create will have or enable us to have balanced community, affordability focus, something that's very important to our communities today, and also reflect social justice. Next slide, please. So the housing element, this is updated on an 8-year cycle, and public review the team will have a draft for public review this coming April. So we will also be communicating that update when the time comes. Next slide, please. Again, reiterating that environmental justice, this is the new element. It's new for Menlo Park. It is required by state law, and our presenter, Eric, will touch more on these in detail. But the whole focus, it will focus on the neighborhoods in Menlo Park with greater health risks compared to the rest of the city. So issues that will be discussed, including exposure to pollution, environmental impacts, sensitive populations, as well as socioeconomic factors. For the safety elements, again, we're updating this inconsistent with the state law. And what we're gonna try here is also incorporate the countywide local hazard mitigation plan that was completed last year in August. So our role, my Climate Resilient Community's main role is to help our planning team with community outreach and community engagement. And as you may all know, this is meeting number 6. We have done some community outreach in the past, as you can see on the slide. There have been city council meetings on this topic. There have been pop-up events, citywide mailers, also other efforts that completed last year and early this year regarding this. But what we are planning to do in the future, in the months to come, is to do more of these kind of engagement process. And as you can see, Eric will highlight what are the vulnerable populations and the vulnerable neighborhoods and what CRC is planning for our outreach. We're gonna do this kind of meeting in our own neighborhoods, in Belhaven, also Bayfront neighborhoods on the other side. So what's in the pipeline? We're gonna do around 3 focus groups in the coming month, as well as a second survey. And the hope is to use those opportunities to gather your insight, your expertise, to have that included in this plan. And we will also bring back the draft of this report to you when it's ready, and that will be down, it will be planned as soon as we have a draft report. So those are the outreach plans that we have, or engagement. The hope is that we will do our best to engage with you all in a meaningful way, so that all of your expertise, priorities will be considered in this environmental justice policies and plans. Next slide, please. So now I'm gonna give the opportunity to Calvin for the live polling. I'm sure some of you are here, who've already filled in that form. So this, I think, will be for the people, our community online. And following that, Eric from Change Lab Solutions will give the presentation on environmental justice, and hopefully will provide more information for you all to hear tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Violet. For those joining us in the room, you should have received a handout with a hard copy with some of the poll questions that we're going to display on the screen. If you're joining us in the council chambers and don't have one of those polling handouts, please raise your hand and one of our project team can give you one of them. Okay, great. Looks like everyone in the council chambers has the polling exercise. Tom, now I'll turn it to you to go through the poll. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cal. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. All right, and that poll should be live now. The question is, which Menlo Park district do you live in?
Let's switch to the next slide, please. And then for the people joining us in the council chambers, this is a larger map. I did hear a question. District 1 does include the Belhaven neighborhood, yes.
We're still getting some answers coming in. We'll wait just a couple more seconds here.
And just in case some people can't read some of the options, the options are District 1, District 2, 3, 4, 5. There's also an option to select that you don't live in Menlo Park, if that applies to you. So for those joining us in the council chambers, please feel free to insert your response, and then we'll collect these responses at the very end. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you for walking through that question, Cal. It looks like the answers have stabilized here a little bit, with District 2 as the primary district represented here tonight, followed by District 1, and then Districts 3 and 4 are about tied for third, and District 5 a little bit lower than that. So, and then also a contingent of people who do not live in Menlo Park. So thank you all for your participation in that poll. I'll move on to the next question. So question 2 is regarding community health need in the neighborhood. Which of these is the greatest community health need in your neighborhood? Ensuring safe and sanitary homes, reducing pollution exposure, improving healthy food access, enhancing public facilities and incentivizing physical activity, or another not listed here. Give another 10 seconds or so to go ahead and enter your responses. Still have a few coming in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. So the results are reducing pollution exposure, about 41% of respondents, followed by ensuring safe and sanitary homes with 18%, enhancing public facilities and incentivizing physical activity is just a little bit behind in third. And then another concern not listed here, followed by improving healthy food access at 8%.
Thanks, Tom. So now we'll actually turn it over to Eric Calloway with Change Lab. And the question that, the poll question that was just answered will actually come back later in the presentation. So thank you for giving your initial feedback. You'll have another chance to see if your answers still say the same following Eric's explanation. And we'll turn it over to you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here to talk to you all about environmental justice in Menlo Park. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned, part of what I want to share with you today is some level setting about some of the terms, because often terms can be very technical and they have specific meanings. And so hopefully by defining some of these terms, it will help you understand what the purpose of this environmental justice element is and how it can benefit residents across the city as well as in specific neighborhoods. So environmental justice is treating people of all races, cultures, and incomes fairly with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of policies that determine how healthy or unhealthy different neighborhoods are. And unfortunately, low-income neighborhoods and communities of color have historically not been treated fairly. And as a result, these communities have faced and continue to face unequal and unjust health risks. Next slide. The state of California recognizes these facts, and in 2016, Senate Bill 1000 was signed into law. This bill requires cities to address environmental justice in their general plan in order to reduce the, quote, unique or compounded health risks in disadvantaged communities. Next slide. Now, when we talk about health, we're talking about a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease. Next slide. And studies show that healthcare services, which you might think of most commonly related to health, are only responsible for about 20% of our health. The large majority of our health is determined by two aspects of neighborhoods that together shape our ability to have healthy behaviors. First, there are all the different elements of the physical environment. Next slide. So think about all the different neighborhoods where you live, the centers where people go shopping, the districts where people work, the districts and corridors that are activated by transit routes. Then think about how the physical characteristics are different from one place to another. Do those characteristics support walking through the level of activity, the mixes of uses, and the orientation of buildings? Are buildings close to the sidewalk? Do they face parking lots? Are the homes well maintained, safe and affordable? Are there parks and plazas where you or a child can safely play, exercise, relax, or socialize? Are there places to get healthy food? Can you get there and do a variety of activities without getting into a car? Next slide. The second aspect of neighborhoods that shape our health are social and economic systems, policies, and norms. Next slide. Air, water, or soil pollution, poverty, community trauma, language, culture, and access to services such as childcare. These types of systems, policies, and norms also have a profound effect on people's health, both directly and by influencing their behaviors. Next slide. By thinking about neighborhoods this way, you can see how these place-based differences contribute to different health outcomes because some neighborhoods support healthy living, while other neighborhoods have built environments and community contexts which make it much more likely that people will have a variety of health challenges. Now, the city is committed to ensuring everyone is healthy and recognizes that some neighborhoods in Menlo Park face unequal barriers to health. So the city is preparing its first environmental justice element as part of this general plan in order to address unequal barriers to health. Next slide. To do that, the city will be taking 3 steps. First, Menlo Park must identify, quote, disadvantaged communities within the city. Next slide. The state defines disadvantaged communities as neighborhoods that have a combination of disproportionately high levels of environmental health hazards and concentrations of people that are of low income, high unemployment, low levels of home ownership, high rent burden, sensitive populations, or low levels of educational attainment. Next slide. The California Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment has created a tool called Cal EnviroScreen to support this process. The tool tracks a range of pollution, population, and socioeconomic characteristics in every census tract across the state that can lead to negative health effects. These characteristics are the starting point for identifying disadvantaged communities. However, the city wants to make sure that residents provide input into what we should consider when identifying these neighborhoods. Next slide. Now, 3 communities stood out in our analysis as disadvantaged communities: Bellhaven, Bayfront, and the Willows. And keep in mind that portions of these neighborhoods fall outside of Menlo Park city limits. Next slide. The city also wants residents to help decide what terms are used in the general plan when referring to these neighborhoods. The plan could use terms such as underserved community, impacted community, environmental justice neighborhoods, environmentally resilient communities, or something else, as long as they have the same criteria and will have the same status for the state. Next slide. Now, once disadvantaged communities are identified, the city will need to understand the health risks that exist in these neighborhoods. Next slide. In preparation for the environmental justice element, staff has created a summary analysis of pollution exposure, environmental effects, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors in each of Menlo Park's 16 neighborhoods. The purpose, stay on that slide, please. The purpose of the neighborhood profile is to provide a basis of knowledge for residents to better understand their surroundings and how those surroundings affect public health. Be able to view the neighborhood profiles on the city's website at a point in the future. And some of the exposures and environmental effect risks might sound a little bit concerning. So to set a little bit of a baseline about what they mean, an exposure and environmental risk can result from conditions such as a neighborhood's being close to streets that carry a lot of traffic, being close to current or historical industrial businesses that handle hazardous or solid waste, or concentrations of older homes that may have lead-based paint. On the next few slides, I'll present a quick summary of what stood out in the 3 neighborhoods that we've identified as disadvantaged communities so far. Next slide. Now, on these slides, the reddish color indicates that the neighborhood has health risks that rank highly relative to all other neighborhoods across the state of California. The yellow color indicates that the neighborhood has health risks that rank highly relative to other neighborhoods across Menlo Park. And the green color indicates that there's a relatively low health risk. Now, as I go through these, remember that this presentation will be available to review after today's meeting. So you'll be able to see the numbers on here and look more closely. And the data that this summary is based on is in the neighborhood profiles document that will also be available on the city's website. So here on this slide, we see that Bellhaven and the Western Bayfront District have poor air quality, high traffic volumes, groundwater threats, hazardous waste, solid waste, cleanup site, and lead risk exposures. Next slide. And Bellhaven and the Western Bayfront District also have higher rates of low birth weight, high housing burden, low educational attainment, high numbers of non-English speakers, and high rates of poverty. Next slide. The Eastern Bayfront District has similar groundwater, hazardous waste, solid waste, cleanup site, and lead risk as Bellhaven and the Western Bayfront District. Next slide. And the East Bayfront District also has higher health risk across almost all categories. Next slide. Now, in terms of the Willows neighborhood, some of the neighborhood is in Menlo Park and some of the neighborhood is in East Palo Alto. The western portion of the neighborhood in Menlo Park has fewer pollution exposure and environmental health risk factors. Next slide. And that portion in Menlo Park also has no population or socioeconomic health risk factors. Next slide. But the city has focused on this neighborhood because the eastern portion of the Willows has similar air quality, traffic, hazardous waste, and lead risk issues as Bellhaven and the Bayfront. Next slide. And the eastern Willows neighborhood has similar population and socioeconomic health risk factors as Bellhaven and the Bayfront. And so from a planning perspective, it's important to recognize that neighborhoods aren't defined solely by lines on a map, but they are contiguous places. So overall, conditions that are most common across all three neighborhoods include air quality, traffic, hazardous waste, lead risk, housing burden, educational attainment, language, and poverty. Next slide. Now, once the disadvantaged communities have been identified and the health risks are understood, the city must address a range of environmental justice goals, policies, and objectives throughout the general plan. Next slide. To do this, the final general plan must contain objectives and policies that address at least 6 environmental justice topics. Next slide. Now, these will be familiar with you because they relate to the poll. Safe and sanitary homes. Next slide. Pollution exposure and air quality. Next slide. Food access. Next slide. Public facilities and physical activity. And finally, the plan must also promote civic engagement in public decision-making processes, which is part of, doesn't have to wait until the general plan is written. So these workshops and what climate resilient communities will be doing is part of that civic engagement. And the plan must also establish a process to prioritize built environment improvements and programs that address the needs in these neighborhoods. And just to clarify that these are the issues that the state requires in an environmental justice element, but the city has the discretion to address any particular disparity that exists, and to go into more detail into each of these issues, such as we saw in the chat, like bike and pedestrian safety, for example, as part of incentivizing physical activity. With that, we will move to our next poll.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll again. So I'm actually going to relaunch poll number 2 and just see if it changes our results any based on what was just discussed. And we'll leave this open just for a short time since it's should be familiar to you at this point. So which of these is the greatest community health need in your neighborhood? Ensuring safe and sanitary homes, reducing pollution exposure, improving healthy food access, enhancing public facilities, and incentivizing physical activity, or other? And I'll leave this open about 5 seconds longer here. All right. So we actually got significantly more individuals participating online, expressing concerns about pollution exposure and reduction of that. So I will go ahead and share those results. So you can see here that that was far and away the leader with 58%. And then following after that was safe and sanitary homes, ensuring safe and sanitary homes with 18%. So I will move into the next poll now. Do you believe the disadvantaged communities currently identified are accurate? Answers are no, there are more. No, there are fewer. Yes, or I'm not sure. We're getting some responses in. So I'll leave this open just for a little bit longer as I continue to see people selecting their choices. Okay, looks like the results have stabilized. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And the majority said yes, they do believe that the disadvantaged communities that were identified are accurate with 47%. And then there was a tie between no, there are more, and I'm not sure with 22%, and 9% said no, there are fewer. All right, we have one more poll for this round. What term could be used in place of disadvantaged communities? The options here are frontline communities, underserved communities, underserved populations, impacted communities, equity priority communities, or I prefer we use the term disadvantaged communities.
For those of you who are there in person, there was a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see about how many people are virtually attending so that they understand the poll responses. And there are currently about 60 virtual attendees.
And for those joining us virtually, just in a quick count, there's probably between 25 to 30 people joining us in the council chambers. So thank you everyone for being here today.
All right, so it looks like our results have stabilized here. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And the number one option is underserved communities with 39%. Let me share those results. 39% said underserved communities. 26% said impacted communities. And then the other options were pretty even. So I'll go ahead and end the polling here for now and turn it back to our presenters.
I think the next slides might be mine. Could we advance a couple forward? Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Erin Tao. I am with M Group, and I'm going to be talking a bit about the safety element tonight. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the safety element is to ensure the safety of the community by reducing risks to people, property, and infrastructure. And so some of the hazards that are covered within this part of the general plan are things such as wildfire and wildfire smoke, sea level rise and flooding, seismic hazards such as earthquakes, as well as hazardous materials. This part of the general plan is also going to be covering what the city's emergency response plan is, and then it's also going to address climate change adaptation. The main components of the safety element is largely one, identifying some of the existing conditions in relationship to hazards in the city, and then analyzing future conditions and future risks. And number three is determining who is most vulnerable to some of these risks. And then the last component of the safety element is policies and programs that sort of ensure the safety of the community. Next slide, please. So the state recognizes that climate change is a key component that is impacting safety more and more now. And so in 2015, the state passed a Senate Bill 379, which requires that any new safety element or any update to a safety element integrates climate adaptation and resilience policies. And so what this is adaptation broadly refers to some of the actions that the city can be taking to reduce the impacts of a hazard that has already happened. So for example, the city might be seeing more extreme heat days. And so an example of an adaptation action could be something like looking at cooling shelters to make sure that people in the community are prepared for extreme heat events. And then the other component of this resilience policies refers to actions that we can be taking to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to an impact. So broadly, this is looking at how can the city and the community cope with the impacts of climate change. Another piece of the safety element is the vulnerability assessment. And what this is it includes some of the historical data on hazards and future projections of risks. So this vulnerability assessment would evaluate what populations in the city and what infrastructure could be most vulnerable to future hazards. One thing to note is that the safety element is less neighborhood specific than the environmental justice element. It's focused more broadly on citywide strategies and looking at the city's collaboration with the rest of the region. But of course, some climate impacts are definitely disproportionately going to affect certain neighborhoods. And so Violet and her team are going to be conducting additional outreach after this meeting in those communities to make sure that any strategies that are developed really do address the risks in communities that are most impacted by these future hazards. Next slide, please. So the two main goals of the safety element is number one, identifying some of the measures that can be implemented to reduce potential risks from natural and human-made hazards. And then the second goal of the safety element is to address the city's strategy on climate change, so addressing climate adaptation and resiliency. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm getting a note to slow down a bit for our interpreters. So the local hazard mitigation plan is something that the safety element is going to be heavily relying on. What this is, the LHMP, this is a document that San Mateo County adopted recently in November of 2021. And what this plan covers is a countywide vulnerability assessment and a plan for reducing risks to hazards. This plan was developed in collaboration with all the cities in the county, including Menlo Park. And it included a fairly robust community engagement strategy, including surveys, focus groups, and public workshops. Although this document is meant to cover the county-wide strategy, it also includes contents that are specific to Menlo Park. So specific to Menlo Park, this document includes a risk and vulnerability assessment. It identifies citywide mitigation actions, and then it also includes an assessment of the city's ability to implement these mitigation actions. Next slide, please. So within the LHMP, a countywide risk assessment was conducted, and this evaluated all of the hazards in the county based on highest to lowest risk. and risk factors were determined based on the likelihood of the hazard occurring, and then also the potential impacts on people, property, and the economy. And so for San Mateo County, the top 3 hazards identified were sea level rise, earthquakes, and landslides. For Menlo Park, the hazard ranking was quite similar to the countywide rankings, with the exception that instead of landslides being in one of the top 3 risks, Menlo Park's top highest hazards were sea level rise, earthquakes, and flooding. And with that, that was a very brief, broad overview of the safety element and the LHMP. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom to go over the poll.
All right, thank you, Erin. So I am back with the final poll of the evening for this part of the meeting. So we'll go ahead and launch this. Which of these hazards concern you the most? The options are wildfire and smoke, heat waves, drought conditions, flooding, earthquakes, sea level rise, or air quality. We still have some responses coming in. I'll hold for a few more seconds here.
I just want to note for those of us joining virtually, if you see an option or want to write an option that's not on this list, feel free to input it into the chat. And for people joining us in person at the council chambers, please also do feel free to write it on your handout.
All right, thanks, Cal. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. And the results are almost 50% of people ranked air quality as their #1 concern, followed by drought conditions at 19% and wildfire and smoke at 17%. Those are the three major items, and then flooding, sea level rise, and earthquakes all coming in at 8% or less. All right, and I will turn it back over to the presenters.
I think the next couple slides are probably Violet's going over next steps.
Okay, so what's coming soon? As I mentioned before, that we are planning focus groups. These focus groups are going to be held in our neighborhoods in Belhaven, Willows, as well as Bayfront. I also want to acknowledge that we do have a climate change community team in Belhaven, and a lot of our community leaders, as well as other nonprofits and community-based organizations are part of this team, who will be helping climate resilient communities and this planning team to not only engage with our community in these neighborhoods, as well as helping us to design the survey and also help us facilitate these focus groups. So the plan is we hope to conduct a focus group just for our Spanish speaking community or Latinx community. Of course, an English speaking group where I think most of us here tonight can participate. And then we're also hoping to engage with our elderly population as well as our youth population. For the survey, we are planning the survey to start in mid-May and end in June. Again, the planning process, we hope to gather more input, prioritization from our community, and also providing us with data to confirm some of the priorities and policies established through other community engagement process. So that's what's coming soon. If you have given us your contact information tonight, for those of our communities and residents tuning in on Zoom, please contact Climate Resilient Communities if you want to participate, and we will, of course, we will contact you as well in the near future. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information, or you can also contact the City of Menlo Park, Deanna, or Calvin, who is here today with us. These are our contact information. If you want more information about the topics tonight and the discussion, as well as what's ahead, please feel free to contact me. And then, next slide, please. So the next part of our session tonight, we're gonna have the opportunity with our community here to, if you have, you can walk through some of the slides that were on the presentations. We also have them blown up and on boards. If you can also write anything, feel free to do so. But next, I want to invite Jeff and Calvin to come up here and help address any questions that our audience or our communities that are here tonight regarding the presentation. And I believe Eric and Sang on Zoom will work with our Zoom community tonight to address any questions they may have.